door now. Police, hands up. Police, hands up.
Black man, Flynn.
Put on your side.
I'm with you.
Bravo, push left.
Right.
On your reach, up.
Hands up.
Hands up, hands up, hands up. We're pushing.
Take the room. Take the room.
What if the ghost of Mexico's most feared cartel kingpin finally stepped into the glaring light of a U.S. raid? On the night of October 7, 2025, San Pedro's quiet docks were shattered by a thunderous symphony of helicopters, armored convoys, and a flood of federal agents that turned the sleepy harbor into a battlefield. It was the moment the world had been waiting for, a culmination of a decade-long hunt for the crown prince of the CJNG, El Mencho. In this video, we pull back the curtain on that historic arrest, revealing the seismic shockwaves that rippled through both Mexico and the United States. From the tense hush that gripped the Los Angeles harbor to the dramatic convergence of the FBI and LAPD at a single point, we dissect every critical moment that brought this global drug lord to justice. Why did saying goodbye to El Mencho feel like the beginning of a new era? How did the raid reshape international law enforcement tactics? And what untold stories lie beneath the surface of this high-stakes operation? Stay tuned as we uncover the untold details that will keep you on the edge of your seat and forever change how you see the fight against organized crime. The night of October 7, 2025, draped San Pedro in a silence that felt almost conspiratorial. Dawn was not yet born. The sky was a bruised slate, pierced only by the relentless glow of searchlights that flared up like a series of angry eyes in the dark. High above, helicopters hovered, their rotors slicing through the pre-dawn air, while below, armored SUVs formed a tight wall of steel, sealing every alley and corner. A swarm of federal agents and local police officers marched in synchronized waves through the residential blocks, their boots echoing against the brick and concrete. The city had never seen a street that looked so much like a battlefield. It was a calculated assault, the culmination of a decades-long hunt that had finally closed in on the world's most wanted drug lord, El Mencho. Operation Wipeout was not a random raid. It was the product of years of painstaking surveillance, relentless intelligence gathering, and an unyielding determination to cut the veins of the criminal empire that had festered beneath the city's surface. Behind the visible chaos lay a complex network of criminal organizations, their roots extending deep into the docks, the streets, and the shadows of San Pedro. The target was the Rancho San Pedro Gang, a street organization that had evolved from a local crew in the 1970s into a multi-generational enterprise and, crucially, a front for the Mexican Mafia, a prison-based syndicate that had long exerted control over the region. The gang's structure was intricate. It was divided into 6 distinct subsets, each with its own territory, its own set of responsibilities, yet all answered to a higher authority. 2 of these subsets were composed entirely of women, a fact that underscored the breadth and depth of the organization. Each division operated like a separate business unit, but all shared a common revenue stream, a shared hierarchy, and a shared allegiance to a name that resonated far beyond the city limits. The Mexican Mafia demanded taxes from every criminal activity within its territory. Drug deals, weapons transfers, even illicit businesses run by local entrepreneurs. In return, the cartel offered a sophisticated framework that granted the street gangs operational legitimacy and coordination that would be impossible for an independent operator. Behind prison walls, the Mexican Mafia exercised a brutal brand of control, dictating strict codes of conduct. Any deviation, tax evasion, encroachment, or disrespect could trigger violent retaliation. Cooperation with law enforcement was a death sentence. A single misstep could lead to beatings, arrests, or murder. For the Rancho San Pedro members, the Mafia was both patron and executioner, a dual role that made loyalty almost a matter of survival. The federal complaint unsealed on the day of the raid detailed how gang members received orders directly from incarcerated leaders. These commands range from tax collection to drug distribution strategies, even the allocation of leadership positions within the gang's own ranks. The investigative work that led to Operation Wipeout was exhaustive. Federal agents and local detectives spent years monitoring the gang's movements. They recorded drug transactions, weapons deals, and violent acts, all while documenting how the money flowed back to incarcerated Mexican mafia members. They identified the shot callers, the individuals who set the direction for the organization, and the enforcers, the muscle that carried out the mafia's will. By removing these key figures from the streets and pressing RICO charges against them, authorities hope to dismantle the gang's ability to function as an organized enterprise and to send a message that the criminal enterprise's upper echelon could no longer operate from the shadows. When the raid struck, it targeted the gang's upper tier. The first night of the operation saw authorities swarm 6 buildings on a single block, each a hub of criminal activity that had become the nerve center of the gang's operations. Police and FBI teams conducted simultaneous knocks, leaving no room for error or escape. They moved with the speed of a well-trained unit, a kind that only months of rehearsals and simulations could produce. The result was the arrest of 13 individuals, each a decision-maker, each a conduit for the Mexican mafia's directives. The charges brought against them were severe federal RICO indictments that held the promise of removing the gang from the streets entirely. The raid yielded significant findings. Among them was the realization that the gang's operations were not merely local. They had become an arm of the Mexican mafia, a prison-based organization that used the street gang to exert control and coordinate large-scale criminal activity. The gang had received orders on everything from tax collections from other criminals to the arrangement of drug distribution networks to the acquisition and transfer of firearms. These orders were sent through encrypted channels, relayed by trusted couriers, and executed with chilling efficiency. The revelation was a stark illustration of how an ostensibly small street organization could be a linchpin in a far-reaching criminal conspiracy. The federal agents were not merely arresting individuals, they were severing the lifelines that allowed a syndicate to thrive in the city. They were dismantling a network that had been woven through the docks, the markets, and the neighborhoods of San Pedro. And in doing so, they exposed a shadowy world that had been hidden beneath everyday life. The police officers on the ground described the night as a blitz, a coordinated onslaught that brought together intelligence, strategy, and sheer force to break the cartel's grip. Their next steps involved dismantling the remaining factions, identifying new leaders, and continuing the painstaking work of case building. They vowed that the city would not tolerate such violence again, and that their persistence would continue beyond the arrests. But the raid in San Pedro was only one piece of a larger, more complex puzzle. While the Mexican mafia and its street gang proxies were severely weakened, the cartel Jalisco New Generation, known as CJNG, remained a formidable force. El Mencho's rise to power began in the rural landscapes of Mexico, far from the city's docks. Born in Aguila Matacan on July 17, 1966, his path to becoming a cartel kingpin began with minor drug convictions and the turbulence of being deported from the United States. These early encounters with the law were the opening chapter of a much longer and bloodier story. Upon returning to Mexico, he aligned himself with the Mencho cartel, gaining experience and connections within the drug trafficking underworld. Around 2009, he founded the CJNG as a splinter group from the Mencho organization, a move that would transform the cartel into a hyper-violent, highly sophisticated, transnational criminal organization. Under El Mencho's leadership, the CJNG came to control critical strategic assets. One of the most pivotal was the port of Manzano, a gateway that became a primary entry point for precursor chemicals shipped from China. These chemicals, essential for the production of methamphetamine and fentanyl, were just the tip of the iceberg. Today, the CJNG operates in all 32 Mexican states and maintains a presence in multiple foreign countries, forming a truly global criminal network. Its product portfolio reads like a catalog of death: fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin that flowed across the youth at the Mexican border in staggering quantities. The cartel's synthetic opioids are directly linked to the American opioid epidemic, contributing to tens of thousands of overdose deaths annually. Drugs were only one part of El Mencho's empire. The cartel diversified into extortion rackets targeting businesses and agricultural producers, human trafficking operations marked by shocking brutality, and sophisticated financial fraud schemes that moved money through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. What made El Mencho particularly dangerous and elusive was his operational style. Unlike flashy cartel leaders who courted media attention, he operated from the shadows, avoiding photographs, public appearances, and even the slightest hint of visibility. His communication channels were encrypted, his couriers trusted, and his movements carefully obscured, making him a ghost in the eyes of law enforcement. The United States government had placed a $15 million bounty on his head, making him one of the most wanted fugitives in the world. Despite this massive reward and the focused efforts of American and Mexican law enforcement agencies, he remained at large. He was a ghost who orchestrated violence and drug trafficking on a massive scale, while successfully evading capture year after year. In a city that had always seemed to rely on the myth of the self-made man, El Mencho's story was a stark reminder that the line between economic opportunity and violent crime is thinner than it appears. Back in San Pedro, the aftermath of the raid settled in like dust. Residents peered out of their windows, wondering what would become of their streets. Some felt a sense of relief, knowing that the violent criminal networks had been struck down, while others felt uncertainty. Law enforcement officials were clear that this was a victory, but not a definitive end. Their next steps involved dismantling the remaining factions, identifying new leaders, and continuing the painstaking work of case building. The message was one of relentless persistence, a vow that the city would not tolerate such violence again. Operation Wipeout had been a triumph of coordination, intelligence, and strategy. It had demonstrated that even the most entrenched criminal enterprises could be dismantled if law enforcement agencies worked in concert, built solid cases, and targeted the core of the organization. The removal of the shot callers, the decision-makers who orchestrated the gang's day-to-day activities, was a blow to the structure of the gang and a step toward weakening the Mexican mafia's influence over street gangs. Yet the broader story remained unfinished. The CJNG's reach extended far beyond the borders of Los Angeles into every corner of Mexico and across the globe. The synthetic drugs it produced fed the opioid crisis in the United States, while its extortion and human trafficking operations further destabilized communities both near and far. The shadow of El Mencho loomed over law enforcement efforts. A specter that reminded everyone of the complex web of corruption, fear, and violence that underpinned organized crime. The city had taken a step, but the battle was only just beginning. The 2025 law enforcement blitz, while devastating to the cartel's infrastructure, revealed a paradoxical resilience. Each high-profile arrest did not cripple the CJNG. Instead, it merely shifted the cartel's focus to other nodes and operations. The cartel adapted, its leaders re-established new routes, and its financial machinery found new ways to launder proceeds. Law enforcement was forced to pivot, to develop new investigative techniques, and to strengthen international cooperation. The city's victory at San Pedro sent a clear message. Coordinated intelligence, meticulous planning, and targeted arrests could bring down even the most entrenched criminal networks. But the fight against the CJNG would require the same level of persistence, the same unyielding commitment, and the same willingness to adapt. The silence that lingered in San Pedro after the raid was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a city holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter. residents would soon learn that the removal of a cartel kingpin was a single act in a much larger war. The city streets would be reshaped by the absence of the violence that had once permeated them. Yet new threats would rise from the shadows. New leaders would claim the vacated positions, and the war would continue in a relentless cycle of rise, crackdown, and resurgence. Operation Wipeout had demonstrated that the law could strike, but it had also shown that the criminal enterprises were capable of reconfiguring themselves in response to pressure. The city had taken a decisive step forward, and the future would hinge on how the law would adapt to a threat that is always one step ahead, a ghost that continues to orchestrate violence from the shadows. The momentum that had built after the San Pedro raid did not pause. In February, the United States Congress, spurred by the relentless tide of arrests and seized shipments, voted to designate the CJNG under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. That move amplified the already severe sanctions and granted the Department of Justice a sharper blade, allowing it to cut through the cartel's financial lifelines across the Atlantic. Banks and money-handling firms that had once played a silent role now found themselves under scrutiny. Suddenly, the hidden accounts that had slipped through tax havens were laid bare, and the once unseen web of shell companies began to unravel. The ripple effect stretched beyond the United States. Financial institutions worldwide, connected to the CJNG's illicit streams, had to reckon with the new reality that a cartel's profit could no longer move freely in the shadows. With the Kingpin label now attached, investigators dove deeper into the money laundering machinery that fed El Mencho's empire. A former banker, once considered a quiet accomplice, was indicted after the Department of Justice linked his offshore processing of millions of dollars to the cartel's coffers. In the fluorescent glow of the federal courthouse, prosecutors presented evidence of how his transactions had funneled funds into a network that, for years, had kept the CJNG's operations buoyant. The case served not only as a legal milestone, but also as a warning to the cartel's global partners. The era of invisible financial flow was over. Meanwhile, extradition teams had begun to close on the cartel's operatives abroad. Legal proceedings swirled in a quiet, relentless tide. A network of shell companies, once insulated behind foreign banks, was now frozen by the Office of Foreign Assets Control. The U.S. Treasury Department, in a decisive move, severed the lifeline that had kept the cartel's machinery humming. The freeze on thousands of accounts disrupted the day-to-day transactions that had, for decades, funded drug production, weapon procurement, and the lavish lifestyles of CJNG members. The tightening net was closing around every avenue the cartel had taken to hide its wealth. But the financial crackdown was only one arm of the campaign. In a daring operation in late spring, a key lieutenant named Aliano was captured in the remote hills surrounding a small village. Aliano, a seasoned smuggler, had been responsible for moving vast quantities of synthetic opioids across the porous border. In the aftermath of his arrest, intelligence units discovered that he had been coordinating shipments of the cartel's signature drug, fentanyl, through clandestine corridors that bypassed standard checkpoints. The seizure of Alino's cash, kilograms of fentanyl, alongside a trove of weaponry, highlighted the CJNG's capacity for stealth logistics. The capture also confirmed that the cartel's internal structure was flexible. When pressure mounted on one front, they could pivot to another with relative ease. The strategic pivot did not stop there. The CJNG, sensing the shifting balance, found sanctuary in the fractious world of the Sinaloa cartel. By aligning themselves with the Los Chapitos, who were grappling with internal strife, the CJNG extended its reach into new drug corridors. This alliance was born of necessity and opportunity. The cartel, ever adaptive, leveraged the chaos within Sinaloa to secure fresh routes for synthetic opioids and hard drugs. The Los Chapitos, with their entrenched local presence, supplied the CJNG with the knowledge of hidden paths through the mountains, while the CJNG provided resources and protection in exchange for a slice of the lucrative trade. This partnership was, at its core, a strategic gamble that illustrated the cartel's mastery of opportunism. It made the realization clear that a single line of attack would never sever the entire beast. With the cartel's finances on the brink of collapse and their logistical routes under constant interdiction, the focus turned to the ultimate prize, El Mencho himself. The FBI, working in tandem with local and federal partners, had been tracking the elusive leader for years. The decision to move from a traditional raid to a more decisive action, targeted killings or drone strikes, sparked heated debates among policymakers, intelligence officials, and the public. Jack Riley, a former DEA agent, cautioned that an indiscriminate drone strike could backfire, turning the operation into a political spectacle rather than a strategic advantage. He argued that such a move might inflame tensions with Mexico, jeopardize ongoing cooperation, and potentially create a martyr out of the cartel's leadership. His concerns, rooted in the complexities of cross-border operations, weighed heavily on the deliberations. On the other side of the spectrum, advocates for precision strikes emphasized the tangible impact that the seizure of counterfeit pills and synthetic opioids had on the United States opioid crisis. Every kilogram of fentanyl seized, every batch of counterfeit medication confiscated meant fewer pills on the streets, fewer deaths, and a smaller market for the cartel to exploit. The conversation became a tug-of-war between military pragmatism and diplomatic prudence, a question of whether to pursue a single, high-profile strike or to continue the slow but relentless process of bilateral cooperation. Amid these strategic discussions, the United States and Mexico found themselves at a diplomatic standoff. Mexican officials, wary of a unilateral drone strike, warned against actions that could violate their sovereignty. The United States, frustrated by the lack of tangible progress in capturing El Mencho, pushed for a more decisive offensive. The debate was intense. In the halls of Washington, the counter-narco agencies highlighted that every seizure of fentanyl, every kilogram of counterfeit pill confiscated had a direct, measurable effect on the American communities suffering from the opioid epidemic. They argued that a targeted strike could disrupt the cartel's supply chain in a way that the slow process of institutional reform could not. Against this backdrop, the Department of Justice launched a wave of legal proceedings that linked the cartel's money laundering operations to United States financial institutions. An indictment of a former banker revealed that he had processed millions of dollars through offshore accounts that fed the cartel's coffers. The case underscored the reach of the CJNG's financial infrastructure and served as a stark warning to its global partners. The flow of illicit funds was no longer safe from scrutiny. The previously invisible channels had become exposed to a new era of transparency. The story of the Rancho San Pedro gang's terror over San Pedro, which had once seemed like an isolated episode, now emerged as a microcosm of the larger national picture. Families across both the United States and Mexico mourned the loss of loved ones, while communities struggled with the legacy of a network that thrived on fear and profit. Yet, the law enforcement actions, costly as they were, offered a glimmer of hope. They signaled that justice could still be pursued relentlessly, that no organization was too powerful, and that even the most elusive targets would eventually be held accountable. The public health crisis at the heart of the cartel's demand further complicated the equation. Every counterfeit pill seized and every kilogram of fentanyl intercepted directly reduced the supply of deadly substances that reached American communities. As DEA protocols improved, interdiction at border crossings increased, and the intercepted shipments grew in volume. The heightened cooperation between U.S. and Mexican agencies became the backbone of this success, a tangible demonstration that coordinated effort could make a measurable difference. Within the walls of a federal courthouse, a new wave of legal proceedings began to surface. The Department of Justice pursued cases that tied the cartel's money laundering operations to U.S. financial institutions. The indictment of a former banker was one such example. His role in processing millions of dollars through offshore accounts had provided the cartel's coffers with the capital needed to expand its reach. The prosecutions served as a warning to the cartel's global partners that the flow of illicit funds could no longer move freely through the financial system.